Good morning, everyone. The Diversity Benefits Everyone series, first launched in 2014, is brought to you by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Edgewood College. This series is an opportunity for our Edgewood community to hear directly from content experts and practitioners working with and advocating for underrepresented populations. In our new reality of connecting virtually, this series has transitioned to a number of WebEx panel sessions and interviews that are recorded and made available to faculty and staff as a learning module. Over the next 90 minutes, you'll hear from past members of institutional diversity committees and councils that have produced reports on diversity, written diversity action plans, made recommendations to campus leadership to improve the climate, and contributed significantly to our diversity program. Our main purpose today is to explore the setbacks, challenges, progress, and opportunities that might further build out our commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm Tony Garcia, Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and let's jump in and learn why diversity benefits everyone. As always, we'll get started with brief introductions before transitioning to the rest of the program. Amy, would you mind getting us started with introductions?
Sure. I'm Amy Schiebel. I am an associate professor in the natural science departments, or divisions, whatever they are now. And I direct the Office of Science Outreach. And in that office, we've done a lot of work focused on increasing the diversity within science fields and giving students from diverse backgrounds opportunities to be prepared to study science if they want to. I've been here for 18-ish years, and over those many years, I've been on a variety of councils and task forces and committees and things that whose names I just remember, of course. And so I'm glad that we continue that work. I can say that when Tony came, it became, in my view, much more systemic and in the forefront.
All right. My name is Ahilia Dalla-Costa Beam. I am the Employee Relations Manager in Human Resources. I've been here for, it'll be 5 years in August. And in my time here, I've been part of various diversity and inclusion committees, as well as campus climate survey task force and committees. Looking forward to the conversation.
My name is Dana Bukalik-Selva. I'm an associate professor in the Division of Education. I've been at Edgewood for 12 years. Much of my teaching revolves around diversity issues, both for the undergraduates and graduates. And in my time here at Edgewood, I've been involved in a number of initiatives around diversity and inclusion at the institutional level.
Who is next? Am I next?
Go ahead, Winning.
Oh, okay. Because I wasn't sure if it's John or me. Thank you, Tony. I'm Huining Ouyang, Professor of English and Ethnic Studies. I've been at Edgewood for 21 years. And in my role as my former director of the Center for Multicultural Education and Ethnic Studies, and that was for 9 years. Anyway, I served on various inclusion and diversity related committees, including the, I think that's our earliest, right, 2008 diversity task force that was led by former President Scott Flanagan. And later on, there are several others I can't recall, but that I know Tony's, the one Tony convened, that's the Inclusion Council, and later on the Steering Committee for Diversity. And I'm glad to be back, for better or worse, and I look forward to today's conversation.
John, you're muted.
It looks like, John, we don't have any audio from you. We have video?
I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Karen Ball. I'm the Director of Academic Success. I've been at Edgewood as a staff member for 8 years, but I'm also an alum. I got my degree in math education, and I've spent most of my time working on transition programs for students coming to college who may be underprepared to take college level math. I'm also the Director of Community Scholars. I think there's a lot of intersection in my day-to-day work with diversity and inclusion, and that has led me to many different types of task force and groups that get together at Edgewood to discuss diversity and inclusion.
Hi, my name is Casey Dewitt, and they just started mowing. I am a academic success advisor. I believe this. I've been in many different areas on the college. I actually started being in the Edgewood community in 1986 as a student from 86 to 90, and that's really when I started jumping in on. We didn't have official committees back then, but we definitely had groups to work on issues of inclusion. But I think lately the most formal one I have been on is the same one Huining was talking about, the 2009 to 14. So thanks, good to be here.
I'm Mary Klink, Associate Vice President of Life and Mission. I've been at Edgewood 16 years, for a number of those years as the Director of Campus Ministry or Spiritual Life, and now working more in the area of mission. The overlap, of course, between Dominican life and mission is really strong, and grounds, roots, the kind of work we're doing. The most recent example of being able to serve in a capacity around diversity and inclusion organizationally was co-chairing the, I think, breakout, no, that's not quite right, build-out, strategic build-out committee for the most recent strategic plan. With Tony was able to co-chair the aspect of that looked most directly at inclusion. And then for a number of years was engaged in the Community Scholars program. So bring those different pieces to the table. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, I'm Matthew Schrader, the Director of the Office of Military and Veteran Services. I started this role in 2011 and took part in the inclusion strategy build out in 2016, 2017 that I believe Mary just mentioned that Tony co-chaired. I'm also an alum, much like Karen, so I have both the student and the staff perspective of diversity and inclusion, and I'm happy to be included today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pat Estes. I work in the Office of Institutional Advancement as the Prospect Research Analyst. And prior to that, my current role, which I've been in for close to a year and a half, I worked for a number of years since 2011 in the Office of Institutional Assessment and Research. Diversity has always been a personal passion of mine, and I've really taken that and applied it at Edgewood's early on with the creation of the Campus Climate Survey. I've been involved in the debriefing sessions and workshops related to diversity. And I'm just excited to see everyone here today and talk more about these important topics.
So thank you, everyone. And folks who are watching the recorded session right now saw somebody else, John Leonard, who was speaking, and unfortunately, the audio was not going through. So I'm hoping that John can reconnect. And John's been part of our college for, I'm not sure how many years, but quite some time, and has been leading and co-conspirating around equity, inclusion, and diversity for well before my time here at the college. And he's served on many of the different task force councils, committees that have existed here at Edgewood. And John's connecting right now. I'm hoping he has audio. John?
Hello?
Hi, would you mind introducing yourself, John?
Sorry. My name is John Leonard. I'm in the Religious Studies Department. I'm my 27th year at August, and I'm going to plea dementia because I cannot remember how many diversity inclusion committees. I think the very first one that we started way back in 2000, in 1996 or 7. But it's a very important work, and I'm anxious to hear everybody else's assessment of what we've done and why we haven't moved farther forward. Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone. So for folks that have listened to previous sessions and recordings, generally speaking, this is sort of a great opportunity now where we transition to people's personal stories and commitment to equity inclusion. We will not do that today. I love doing that because I feel it adds the human touch points for folks, especially right now when we aren't on campus, but unfortunately we will not have enough time. And so I'm going to do a little more speaking today than I normally would. And I'm hoping that some of the prompts that I'm providing, and a lot of them are institutional documents, will help guide discussion and that our panelists can respond to. Before we hit record, I asked our panelists to be courageous and to be candid and honest in their assessment and discussion. And of course, that's hard to do in a recorded session. And so I'm going to lead by example here. I know we're all called to pursue truth and stand up for justice. And I'm hoping that this discussion, discussing institutional setbacks and challenges, that's not an easy thing to do. But as we pursue truth, as we stand up for justice, this dialogue and conversation and assessment is critical. So I'm going to start with sort of 5 overarching observations in regards to setbacks that I've personally seen. And I want to name these early because I asked folks to be courageous and I want to lead by example. So there are 5 overarching setbacks, challenges that I've seen that have at times stifled our growth and or set us back. I'm going to name these 5, and then we'll transition to where John was sort of talking about, the 90s. And we'll start with our 92 multicultural plan. But the 5 setbacks I've seen, one starts with campus leadership. We have not truly centered equity and anti-racist work at the heart of our college. We've done a lot of work around diversity and inclusion, and we're now talking equity and anti-racism, which is great, and it shows growth in our program, but we just have not, as sort of leadership, centered equity and anti-racist work at the heart of what we do. Our campus culture is plagued by characteristics of white supremacy, and we need to recognize that, acknowledge that, and then actively dismantle those characteristics. As a college, we are notorious for being reactive in process, policy, programming, and procedures. Our decentralized diversity model has compartmentalized our work in this area. And what I mean by that, organizationally, we've been intentionally designed to have diversity units and offices report to separate divisions, vice presidents, areas of the college, creating barriers for partnerships and siloing our work. So a lot of folks think that Phyllis, myself, Shonda are part of the same team and or represent the same office. We represent all different offices, have different reporting lines, etc. And the 5th point is our predominantly white community has not done enough work to understand the meaning of and implications of whiteness and white privilege. And so those are 5 overarching setbacks that I just want to name early for a variety of reasons, including as folks lean into this conversation and perhaps might not feel that they want to call out, i.e. campus leadership. I'm going to do that for us. And so I'm hoping that over the next hour or so, we can begin unpacking some of these points. And also, I recognize that these are just my own personal observations and sort of my professional observations as well. And there is so much value and experience part of this panel And so I'm hoping not only can we impact some of them, but we'll build on these overarching themes. And I say all this knowing that there's been substantial progress made at Edgewood College. And we have a lot of well-intended people here at Edgewood. But as a man of color, I want change now. Enough is enough. We will not let up, and we will turn pain into progress. And so I'm hopeful, as we discuss over the next hour, our institutional journey and progress, that it might be insightful for some folks. And with all of this in mind, we'll start in the 90s, our 1992, our college's first multicultural plan. And I'd like our panel to respond to what our campus put in words in 1992. And I am pulling up the document if my link works. So on page 5 of our 1992 multicultural plan, there is a passage here that I'm going to read, and then again, I want folks to react to. Again, this is 1992. And here's the passage. Historically, the Cincinnati Dominican Sisters and Edgewood College have been committed to the education of students from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. Many of the sisters have taught minority students in the South and in urban areas as part of their mission. When Dominican high schools were more numerous, especially in the South, these served as feeder schools, bringing minority students to the college. Though always a small number, many of these students assumed positions of leadership in their chosen careers. In the mid-80s, the flow of students from these schools ceased. After some few years of reflection, the college put in place activities to ensure it would continue to have a diverse student body. It has been participating in MATC's pre-collegiate program to prepare students for and encourage them to attend college, attend minority recruitment fairs, and hired a part-time minority counselor. Its artists in residence has brought powerful and high-quality Black gospel singers and musicians to campus annually for the last 3 years. The college has recently joined the Milwaukee Guarantee Program, a program designed to guarantee higher education to eligible high school students. Many faculty have been incorporating multicultural dimensions into their curriculum. It is within this broader context and in the hope of strengthening its efforts to enrich the educational experience of all who come to Edgewood that the Edgewood College Plan for Multicultural Campus has been developed. The entire plan can be found on diversity.edgewood.edu. It's 8 pages. There's a lot of great content in there and recommendations and actions. But I wanted to start here at our roots, reminding folks of our sponsorship, and then reminding people we've been doing this for a really long time. And so I'm going to stop, press the pause button for myself, and have folks react to what they heard.
Hey, Tony and everybody. My first reaction to that being back there was the time that we first started this pattern that we have at Edgewood is how do we invite people of color into our space instead of how do we all create a space that is a reflection of us all. And even back then it felt, I mean, it wasn't systematic. It was just how do we do this? We're trying to bring things that would bring them to us. And that was a clear, that's where we were. And I still have that feeling that's where we are today, is because when people come into our community, how they act, or this is how you do it. And if you don't do it this way, they're gone. So.
I agree with Casey. That's part of the way that white structures have always worked in the world. This is we white people are supposed to be the saviors of the world. Come and learn, and we'll teach you how to survive in our world, instead of the recognition, which we are only now beginning to wake up to, is that the world that we created is essentially inherently uninviting.
At least on my end, it looks like we lost John.
We have to,
She's
oh,
back.
he's back. I heard part of it.
I think you're muted now, John. There it is.
I'm not muted, but it's my internet. Maybe I'll just type things in the chat and somebody else can read that.
Sounds good, John. Winning, I think you were also going to contribute.
Right. And so at that time, I mean, that was probably too early for Edgewood. And so, you know, because it's called the multicultural plan, right? That wording is telling, right? So there's nothing, you know, it doesn't mention anti-racism or racism, you know, or whiteness, white privilege. So yeah, that's how, I guess it's a part of the 1990s culture, right? And I was hired in 1999 as a way to diversify the English faculty. And so I guess that's part of that cultural climate that John was talking about, and Casey as well. So.
Any additional reactions to what was written in the 92 multicultural plan?
Just to jump in some of the structural comments that were made, I think those are really crucial. We see it a lot in K-12 education where people are invited, students are invited to be part of a school structure, but the structure is never questioned. It's never interrogated itself. And so I do think that's an ongoing issue. It's also interesting to hear the word minority used when we're seeing that that is no longer a very useful way to describe people, right? And so not having been here at the time, it's actually very interesting to hear and to hear thoughts from people like Casey and John who were around at that time.
One of the things that I heard in there on a more sort of practical level, I guess, is that they had relationships with a lot of high schools to try to, in whatever way they were trying to do it, to create relationships and establish sort of connections between various high schools, K-12 schools that had the sorts of students they were after. And it seems like for a long time we dropped that and are thinking more about that. I mean, I've been trying to do that on a small scale, you know, here in Dane County, and that's probably why I picked up on that. But I think we need to do a lot better job, at least that's what the research shows, in really creating long-term relationships, starting with kids early, not just when they're juniors and we want them to come to school. And it seems like they had that better back then. I don't know the nature of those relationships, but at least they were talking about them.
So John finished his thought through text. And what he wrote is, white institutions think they can be inclusive by teaching people of color how to live in the real world, without realizing that white people built that world to keep people of color out or minoritized. We think we are moral and kind and compassionate, but we have not realized we are inherently white supremacist.
That kind of ties into a reaction that I had when I read it. You know, it talks about why Edgewood is doing these things to some extent, but it's not, you know, really integrated into our values and why we're doing this. You know, it could have been that it was more of a business model. You know, we need students of color in order to continue to grow, but that's not the only reason. There's a lot of other reasons, and also the fact that activities were mentioned, you know, but what other structures are in place to support students when they get here, and do they have faculty and staff members that they can relate to in their own individual ways?
And so let's move from the 90s to 2008. when the Higher Learning Commission visited Edgewood College. And following 2008, I feel that the college perhaps began investing resources in people power. And that's part of the reason my position was created in the first place in 2010 as LTE was in response to the higher learning recommendations. But there were 4 recs from the Higher Learning Commission 12 years ago. And I'd invite our panelists to respond to these 4 recommendations. Again, these are from our accrediting body that recommended what Pat was just talking about, some paradigm shifts, going above and beyond just recruiting students. So here are the 4 recommendations from 2008. And again, I would ask for reactions. The first recommendation is centralizing the 3 scattered diversity units to a single division with leadership responsibility and accountability to a vice president reporting directly to the college president. Number 2, allocate significant funds to scholarship dollars for minority students. Demonstrating a strong financial commitment to funding diversity takes a critical and absolutely necessary step to creating a culture of inclusion and diversity. Recommendation 3, one-time programs, i.e. diversity training, workshops, recognition dinners, film series, are necessary and commendable. However, they are not creating a culture of inclusion and diversity. A complete paradigm change that actually models inclusion is necessary if the college is to be successful. And recommendation 4, a complete paradigm shift must begin with radical changes at the top level of management, board of trustees, vice presidents, deans, department chairs, and upper level staff positions that make fundamental decisions that define the ethos of the college. I'd invite our panelists to react to the HLC recommendations from 2008, 12 years ago.
I'll jump in again if it's okay. 2008 was really, I think, tell me others if you think different, is when the administration got involved, whereas that's when it became a part of the rest of the staff and faculty's expectation that we're going to do something. But what the HRC committee brought out was like, it was like this, but we went here, but at least we pushed into something. Whereas so Scott became the chair of this department, or the chair of this committee, and that showed that there's some he was the vice president, and that there was some meat behind it, if you will. But what they were asking for and what we got, sure, we got Tony out of that, but at part-time, but we had to really fight and fight and fight. And we were not even, it's almost like the 10 Commandments, how it's something you strive for. And that's how we looked at it. Though that's just something we should strive for, but this is really what we can do. So.
I saw in the comments that John had said that very few of these recommendations have been carried through. And I just kind of wanted to respond to an observation that I'm thinking about, and that's the piece on scholarship. I would argue that Edgewood has really attempted to provide scholarships to students of color, but there has been such a lack in the systemic sort of things that students need to actually help cultivate the college's response to helping them be successful all the way through to graduation. One example of that is we have grow your own programs at Edgewood, and I would bet that a lot of people don't know that. And I just learned yesterday that Edgewood actually pays for that program for students their first year. And there's very little thread through our programming, and especially through the academic experience for students who receive scholarships. And I think that's sometimes where the perception then becomes we're just not doing enough, because students in essence aren't then graduating. I think in college transition work, a lot of us talk about, people will say, oh, they're not college ready. And the paradigm shift is actually we're as an institution aren't ready for the students coming in our doors. And we just haven't caught up to that yet. And that's where I feel like our challenge begins.
Can I jump in about scholarship? And I'm going to go back to that topic as well. Thank you, Karen, for bringing that up. So before I react on the 4 HLC recommendations, Tony, I think John and I were on that committee that led to the creation of the Center for Multicultural Education. There was can't recall exactly what that was called, but I believe it was in 2000. It's part of the academic planning. John Leonard, do you recall that? That we then created first the Center for Global Ed, and then Center for Multicultural Ed, and then Ethnic Studies program was created, right? So, so I think that's part of it's a small step, Tony. I think that should not have been lost as part of our institutional history, in terms of I can look that up in my CV later on. Let Tony know. It's one of the lines there. But in any case, I think that these 2 centers, yeah, as I said, were a small but important step in the academic affairs area. In terms of the 4 recommendations by the HLC, I do not see any of the, well, perhaps some funds are being, in terms of number 2, allocating funds for minority students, but none of the other 3 has been carried out. And in terms of scholarships, and I think that as a former director of the Ethnic Studies program, we had the institutional funds for students pursuing a degree, a minor or major degree, minor degree in ethnic studies. But at some point, it was it's institutional aid, right? It was divested to college access. The reason was that our program were not recruiting enough students of color. I wonder if that was true, but in any case, because we had about 1/3 for a long time, 1/3 of the students, our minors, were students of color. But I just thought it was a mistake by the institution to kind of separate ethnic studies and minority students, quote unquote, minority student funds, because the 2 programs, right, ethnic studies, which is really essential to our student learning on anti-racism, right? So it's really important to kind of collaborate to right, there should be kind of an intersection between the 2. So that's what I want to mention. So just one point about that task force led by, Scott was VP then, right? Not the president at that point? I can't recall.
He was the executive vice president.
Yes, thank you, Tony. So I remember Sister Anne, what's her last name, McClure, from the board, was also there for that. So if that's I don't know then, but then in terms of radical changes from the top, I mean, they are, as Casey said, some of the leadership were involved, but structural changes, and we've hired, I don't know, Tony Chambers, a VP position, or some deans, like what's his name, Steve, in I believe in School of Business, right?
Stevie Watson.
Yeah, Watson, thank you. But they have all left since, so I don't know. A mile forward, 8 miles back. That's something that I mentioned in an email to this group last month or a couple months ago. So in any case, I want to stop here. I don't want to ramble.
I'll jump in. When I heard those recommendations, that was the first year that I came as an adjunct, and I was completely unaware of the HLC and what was happening. And so it's just kind of interesting to look back. I think that there has been significant advance in terms of funding, or at least the awareness of funding. But what really stood out to me was this idea of the necessary or the urgency to create a culture of diversity and inclusion. And I would say that that is an enormous challenge that is still in front of us in terms of how do you shift a culture, because otherwise it becomes, and I think that we are seeing it now, as the financial cuts that are necessary are taking place, they are relying on a culture that is inherently exclusive. And probably the worst thing is that it's not intentional. But when you look at the impact of it, then that becomes really important. And so I think this idea of how do you enact a paradigm shift, how do you really change people's way of thinking and understanding, goes back to some of what John was saying earlier, to have people really question their own privilege, their whiteness, et cetera, from the leadership level to an adjunct, to any staff member, to full faculty, to everybody. And that is something I think that they were wise to point out. And it's distressing to see that in spite of so much work that has been done, we haven't been able to gain enough traction to make significant changes that way. And then the other recommendation I just wanted to mention, and Tony did allude to this earlier, is they were asking for a centralization of diversity work and diversity efforts. And that seems to be, if anything, more sort of fractured. And so again, we see where the structures take an enormous toll in terms of how that plays out. And like Karen said, I mean, I didn't know some of that stuff, you know, and every day you kind of turn around and you go, oh, really? Wait, who knew? And so I think, how can there be a more clear understanding of the structures that we're dealing with, and also importantly, how those structures impact diversity? For instance, and this is just the last thing I'll say, but there have been a couple of pretty serious program cuts in the last few months. Because those programs are not labeled as diversity, it has not been clearly understood, at least at the leadership level, that the impact on students of color was really, really devastating. And so that we have to be able to think, if I do X, Y, or Z, what is going to be the impact of that on the students that we're trying to bring to campus? And also importantly, how do we help white students really interrogate their own position, not to punish them for where they came from or for what they don't know, but to say that this college experience gives them the way to really walk into a wider and more diverse community.
I just wanted to say I graduated technically January 2007, and to hear this coming out in 2008, it makes complete sense, because I do not recall a single class that I had with a student of color. And I know, as a veteran who didn't really feel like I fit on campus at the time, I cannot imagine what it would have been like for a student of color to be on campus at that time and not have anyone to identify with amongst the staff or the faculty, and to really feel like Edgewood was your home. And while we may have made some steps towards doing that now, I again, I can't imagine what it would have been like for a student at that time, hearing the recommendations that were made, and to see in the next couple of years how those recommendations weren't exactly followed.
I'd like to just ask a question about the whole notion of paradigm shift. I know how they happen in science, you know, plate tectonics, big idea. And it takes a long time for the scientific community to sort of accept that idea, come around. It can be decades. I had a sort of a little awakening to this when I was taking my daughter to look at colleges. And we went to one college, and we were going into the cafeteria, and all the kids' backpacks were just lined up, not attended, just all lined up in the student union. That's odd. And then we went to the library, and there's all kinds of laptops. Kids just have walked away from them. They're just sitting there. And I asked our tour guide about that, and she said, oh, it's just a thing here. Nobody takes stuff. And I thought, how do you do that? How do you create this from this wild group of students that come? Like, when you come here, you just don't take stuff. And like, how did they do that? And so when I hear these reports and people talking about, we need to make this paradigm shift, like, those are great words, but I have no idea how you do that. So if anyone has really, I'm very concrete, you know, how does our leadership actually go about doing this? I know communication is a problem. We've had this revolving door of leaders coming and going at every level, and that makes things difficult. But how do we enact a paradigm shift in some kind of actual timely fashion?
I think it's important to also note that in 2008, our student enrollment was very high. So that also plays into why this wasn't as a big, and to get at your question, Amy, I often wonder if there's not I think there was, in my mind, there was a little thought of, we have to get students of color on this campus, otherwise we're going to go down. We need the money. We need their tuition. We need that. That's just the way it's going to go. And, you know, we used to have that, people would come in and say, oh, this is Edgewood. They're just known as nice people. So we do have some sort of a culture that we have created. I don't know how. We're nice, maybe nice, but not so helpful was always something that was said, but I don't know.
I just want to make an observation about the word that keeps coming in my head is the need to be developmental. One size doesn't fit all. And we know that about welcoming people. But when I think about those of us that are faculty, staff, and in any kind of leadership role beyond that, do we assume that we are all at a same place? And when we program, do we program with, this is the track people need to be on? The longer I'm at Edgewood, the more it strikes me that it's probably not the best thing that we just kind of open this up and now go do your thing and be welcoming, et cetera. Go down the line of the issues. And how do we identify not only who really is able to model and lead, and it won't necessarily correlate with titles, and how do we figure out who could really encourage the kind of education and personal conversion that needs to happen? We do a lot of pointing, it seems to me, and say, you need to go get yourself educated about this. And I don't fully want to dismiss that. Yes, we do all need to be about education. But we learn in different ways, and it strikes me, back to the 1992 thing. We're almost 30 years from then. And one part of me wants to go, and are we any further than we were? And what all contributes to that? And I want to put on the table, in our being strategic, I would love us also to intentionally have developmental kind of plans for both students. Someone, I forget who it was, it might have been Donna, mentioning our white students and needing to challenge our white students and thinking about how do we approach work with white students in ways that allows, they may come from places that have never invited them into this conversation before. And I can think about sitting on a judicial where some of you have heard me tell this, where I thought at the end of the day, I think we are here to educate. And if all we do is judge and then dismiss, have we really made any difference in the life of some of the students who come to us way less prepared on this topic than others? Anyway, I'm kind of wandering far, but again, the longer I'm here, the more I'm struck. We need multiple ways to go at that. This is my sense.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something, Mary? I think that changes at the individual level are important, right? We need to educate students, faculty, staff, administration against about individual racism. But I guess what we've been talking about, the HLC recommendations are really and they really emphasize structural paradigmatic changes, and those are our priority right now. So so that's my point. And obviously you mentioned the right leaders, and those are important. I want to go back. I thought that Donna made an important point about the culture, sort of the tension. I think that at Edgewood, and as in this country, in many community in this whole country as well, we experience many tensions, right? So the tension between our sort of the strategic emphasis on inclusion and diversity, our values, right, of truth, justice, compassion, of inclusion, etc. And then there's the tension of our need for the financial viability, right, a viable financial future. So in this past year, and also the tension between intention and impact, right? And this past year, the community, entire Edgewood community has experienced immense traumas. This trauma, we witnessed the attrition of faculty and staff of color, right? Because of our need for cost cutting, right? For to close the budget gaps, and of course you've seen, we've had a discussion at board of. Not board of trustees, but I meant planning a budget, or the board of trustees outgoing chair also commented on this. It's not the college's intention to let go of faculty or staff of faculty of color, and hiring the faculty of color is one of our top priorities, right? Said she. But I don't know if that's one of our top priorities, but then obviously it's not our intention, quote unquote, to let go of these folks. So then when, however, the impact is there, right? If you think about that, and then so when we think about our need to survive financially, how much do those values weigh now in the decision? It just seems a lot of times we no longer talked about the values, right? So that's been pushed to the background. Our priority, immediate need is to close it. So it doesn't matter who would apply for the VSIP, or you just, whoever comes forward, you let them go and check off, balance sheet. Okay, good. So I think that's really important. It's an important sort of phenomenon for us to observe. It's a practice. I say phenomenon as if it's natural, but it's a practice that we need to be mindful of. So in terms of Amy's question, how do we so it's a structural changes, and perhaps, right, the VP, the centralized office of diversity inclusion, that's a structural change. The investment in the scholarships for students of color, for ethnic studies students, and investment in the ethnic studies program, maybe that is a structural change, because over the past few years, we saw a sort of the dismantling of the ethnic studies program. If it's about anti-racism, anti-racist learning, that is central, that program. So I will pause here and let others react or carry on the conversation. Thank you.
I want to transition us to some of what Winning's talking about. But before I do, John contributed through text. And this is, I think, in response to what Mary was sharing. And John wrote, "We are not all at the same place. Perhaps we start by discussing white supremacy and white fragility. So many good-intentioned and good-hearted people are clueless still about what white supremacy is and how they too are victims and proponents of it." Willie Larkin is also on the call, and he made a suggestion: when encountering a person of color, do not interrogate them as if they're the sole expert representing their racial, ethnic, or cultural group. Focus on them as individuals. And so you've heard over the last 40 minutes discussion around revolving door of people at the college. And Winning raised a point about, is recruitment of faculty and staff of color a priority at the college? Well, our 2014 diversity plan had 5 challenge areas. It was a call to action for the college to respond. And of the 5 challenge areas, 2 of them focused specifically on underrepresented faculty and staff, increasing the recruitment of, the retention of, and the support of underrepresented faculty and staff of color. And I wanted to get folks' reactions because we've seen the revolving door. And I'm not just talking about faculty and staff of color, I'm also talking about practitioners who have sat in diversity offices. Pearl Leonard Rocks of the world, Veronica Watson, Stacy Broaches, Ernest Williams, the Glennas of the world. There are so many folks that we can sit here and name who have worked either in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, the Center for Multicultural Education, or supported these organizations through doing some of the diversity work. And so I want to just have some time around reflecting on what have been our practices to retain and support faculty and staff of color. And from the recruitment side, have we seen a true commitment to recruiting faculty and staff of color? Because the number today is 15.5% of our campus body identify as faculty and staff of color. And when you look at those numbers and really tenured track, associate, assistant, who's doing service work, that percentage is sort of doesn't look great. So I want to pause and just think about our 2014 to 2017 diversity 3-year plan, a call to action to enhance the recruitment, retention, and support of faculty and staff who are from underrepresented groups.
I jumping in, but I will go down to my grave saying we can have all the plans that we want. We need to have this percentage of students of color, a faculty of color, and a student. We have to have the same as Dane County, blah, blah, blah. We can do all of that, but if we don't change our culture again and just say, come on in and this is how we do it. Why aren't they staying? I don't understand. But we're not listening. We're not changing our culture. We're not changing our way because we're afraid that we're gonna crumble as an institution if we do that. And that's why I think ever since we started making plans, we're making plans to fit into something that doesn't fit everybody.
I think there's 2 things happening right now nationally that might be useful for us understanding, because when we look at the kind of ongoing uprising with Black Lives Matter, and we think about what people are really demanding is exactly that cultural shift that Casey is mentioning. And I think that I'm certainly seeing it in a lot of students, and I don't mean just students of color right now. So it's an interesting shift. And I think the other thing that I see a lot is a sense of fear. What will something different look like? And when we think of, may he rest in power, John Lewis, who was laid to rest yesterday, and he talked about making good trouble. He said it's a good thing to be a troublemaker. And I think there's a huge sense among so many of us for different reasons, maybe it's Midwestern nice, whatever it is, that we don't really like to make trouble. But if we are going to really shift the culture, that means being at the very least uncomfortable. And so I'm not really even sure how to do that. Maybe there's like a special magical pill. So if there is, let me know. But it's an interesting thing to see how that fear can oftentimes just completely thwart any efforts to really move us forward.
John just contributed through chat here, and as did Willie. I'll read John's contributions. One of those women of color who left Edgewood explained her experience here as follows. Edgewood professes justice and compassion, but the culture is just like every other plantation. We don't allow our community to be changed by those who join us. We force them to become just like us without realizing This is exactly what has built and preserved white supremacy. Willie wrote, when we attract people of color, we can't just assume they are going to be okay. They have to be nurtured and supported throughout. So we need a system to support and mentor people.
And pardon me for butting in again, but I think it's also really important to think about what the burdens that we put on faculty and staff of color to solve the problems of the college. And so I think people are just utterly overwhelmed. And I see that happen with many of my dear colleagues, and some who have left because it's a burden it's just too much.
I also think I agree with all of those Donna's comments and also Willie's as well as John's, those text messages. They just flash across my screen. I'm glad that Tony is reading those out because they appear and then they disappear too quickly before but anyway, I want to mention about for when we bring faculty, staff, admin of color to the campus, right? It's not just to be inclusive. Oh, we welcome you. I think we want to nurture and mentor you, but they should be often placed. I'm hoping that they're hired as leader or leadership in leadership positions, right? So I know I've observed that oftentimes our white colleagues, not all of them, right? Some of them try to center themselves, right? Recenter themselves, or some of them are actually performative allies, right? That they would publicly advocate for justice but then sometimes they would actually turn around and oppress their own colleagues, and then they do not own up to their own racism. I think that's an issue that must be addressed. Perhaps the white consciousness, that group, that conversation, if that can be carried forward, and that would be a place to address that. So I just see a lot of times those folks that Tony, those names that Tony read aloud, those colleagues that have left us. I don't know exactly why they have left. It was the culture. I did hear some of the anecdotal that they were their work environment was toxic or hostile, so that's why they left.
I'm going to shortly read John's contribution again through text, but I just want to piggyback off of what Winning is talking about. And as a former cabinet member who sat around the president's sort of leadership team with deans and vice presidents, I've experienced the toxic work environment and the hostile work environment that you're talking about, Winning. I have experienced colleagues around that table who say they are allies, but when ideas are being floated or it's the time to stand and be an ally, for whatever reason, they fade to the back. And so I personally experienced that. I've seen that. I've taken bias reports from students, from faculty and staff that have echoed much of the same sentiment. And so I just want to acknowledge that this is truly happening. And there are current people at our college who are in leadership roles who unfortunately exhibit these characteristics. John wrote, those of us who want to get the structures changed need to propose the change structure. We need to demonstrate how this could work as a united effort. It needs us to channel our justified anger toward justice building. The folks who have been in charge learned how to organize things in a racist society. They have no models of structures that are inclusive, but we need to channel the anger energy with compassion. We, white folks, need to demonstrate how to give up power. We need to start with one or two entities of the college and show folks how this can be done. One example, when men need to shut up and listen 9 out of the 10 times they think they have to say something. Willie wrote, no matter how No matter where you are in the organization, we all need coaches. Even presidents have personal coaches. I endorse mentorship. Willie also wrote, bad actors have to be checked and there need to be severe consequences and some power sharing. And Pat, feel free if you want to, I think you can join as well and read what you wrote, or if that's just for the group, that's fine too.
Yeah, sure. I was just discussing as a white male, you know, I'm frustrated by seeing the same faces. I mean, I love to see the people that do attend these events, but you know, it's always seems to be the same. So how can we integrate these conversations beyond just you know, a group of people that are championing these efforts, or how can we influence change in a more transformational way? And I was suggesting some kind of larger scale process for discovery and transformation, because cultural change is the most difficult type of organizational change. And it really, a change that I believe that we're imagining would take or require new ways of thinking, interacting, and creating our own future.
And I would put forward, if we think that this is a situation where we could all identify such huge areas of harm that's been done and have been experienced. And so one way forward might be rather than a punitive focus, much more restorative. And to say, how can we assume the best? If this is a beloved community we're trying to create, how do we make it flexible enough that we're saying to people, we still want you in the fold? But how do we make that happen, particularly with students? Because I have experienced in institutions that the reason people don't come to the table is because they're terrified. And my undergrads say to me usually, well, we just learned, we just don't talk about that. It'll blow up in our faces and we're going to be blamed because we don't have the experience that we need. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be held accountable. I think they should. But I think there has to be a way, like when Phyllis was talking about, you know, we're all walking in different places on the road, and some people are joining us at different moments in that journey. And how do we do that in a way that pushes all of us forward, but makes it's like when you have children who are misbehaving, you just say the family, because that would be kind of catastrophic. And so how do you create a situation where there is a high level of expectation, a high level of accountability, but also a high level of personal respect and love, but love in a very authentic way, not like fakey love, but real, honest community love.
Sorry, John. I missed the sense of his last sentence. What he was trying to say is, and offered, is for white men to shut up 9 out of 10 times that they think they have something important to say. This is an example of giving up the power as white men. So we've got a little less than 10 minutes here together. And I want to focus on one quote from our 2009 diversity plan. And this will perhaps allow us some room to give some suggestions to leadership, because that's what it's sort of focusing on here. So the quote is, institutions often have difficulty figuring out next steps beyond people and programs. Campus leaders need to push themselves and others to envision what structures, policies, and rewards would help embed diversity efforts more broadly and deeply into institutional planning, campus culture, and day-to-day work. So thinking about our time together, our work, our experience, and knowing that in order for us to have this paradigm shift, not only do we need campus leadership buy-in, but they need to be part of the change. What recommendations, advice might we have for our campus leaders at this point in time?
First
And
thing,
I think John's
yeah.
white men need to shut up 9 out of 10 times might be applicable to some of our campus leaders as well.
who is looking at that job description for the new VP right now?
Yeah, there are several folks, some of us on this call that have had a chance to review and offer edits. And my understanding is that much of this has been done privately and not sort of in a group setting. And folks have individually, because that's what was asked of us, to give feedback regarding the position description back to the president. And I'm not, and I know it's going to come back to this group or a group. I'm not sure what the process is once the feedback is received and reviewed by the college president to perhaps incorporate or to disregard, dismiss, and or what exactly happens afterwards other than going back out to this group. At least that's what's been communicated
Right.
to me and I think to others as well.
I wonder if the Alana group or faculty of color, have a voice in this. So, because, right, so who the president decides to give the job description to, I mean, I don't know how he decides that, but I just think that group is an important stakeholder, the Alana group that you convened, Tony.
I was also thinking about what you're saying, and just off the top of my head, as a white person, how we make systemic change. And I think for me, myself, I always have to ask, what's the best for our community? And it's hard because right now in the college, we're at such a place where everybody's afraid they're going to lose their job. And so we're kind of at that place where we're all clawing to keep our job. And so then to be asked this question of how can we do a paradigm shift at the same time that we're like, oh my God, what if we do that? Everything's going to collapse. But I have to ask myself, is every decision that we make right now, that we make as a college, is this a decision that is leading us towards a culture of inclusivity that we really, we can't say that, 50% of us, we need more students of color, so we're going to do this. No, it has to be in our DNA to want to do this. And if we don't do that, then maybe we shouldn't be in the leadership positions, whatever that leadership means.
I'm picking back to Amy's statement about this is kind of who we are and this is what we do. And I would like to see students at every meeting, at every session, at every task force, and every WebEx that we do, because it's just something that we do. That's something that I've noticed over the years. It's just an absence of student voice, and we simply just can't do this. If you think about the students that are coming to our campus in 2 weeks, what they are bringing to the table is like no other group that's come before them. And if we don't seize that opportunity, then we shouldn't even exist, because they are bringing more to us than we could ever offer to them at this point. And that's the sort of paradigm shift I think that we need to just take and bring them to the table and have them at the forefront, because I think that's why most of us are here. And so, to John's point, even as faculty and staff and administrators, we need to shut up 9 out of 10 times and listen to the students.
I totally agree with Karen on that. We work and live in a learning community, and we have just as much to learn, if not more, from them than they do from us. So it should really be a full community.
And I just want to say one thing, because I'd be mad if I missed an opportunity to say this. Incremental steps, Amy, I'm totally with you. That's the diversity in our thinking, right? Like what I think like a mathematician, like what's my algorithm? Where are my steps? And a great step we can be taking is the removal of coursework that isn't necessary to helping students achieve the goal that they are trying to achieve in college, whatever that might be. And again, that's student-led, that's student-focused, and they have to be the ones to help us shape that.
Some additional contributions through text. Campus leadership must be bold and push a new and improved agenda that includes all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Foundational pieces should be protected. We need aspirations to work together, own up to institutional and structural racisms, as well as one's own individual bias. All the progress we have made gets nowhere because the leadership still has not done their work on white supremacy, privilege, and fragility. This work goes nowhere because the commitment is not deeply rooted in their hearts and in the hearts and consciousness of a critical mass of persons in the community. The answer to why does none of this data go anywhere beyond reports to the cabinet? Why are none of the recommendations implemented? Ultimately comes back to what people understand with their minds and feel in their hearts. People have to become conscious of their actual worldviews, their beliefs, assumptions about the real dignity of every person, their operative, not merely their professed values, and the vision or goal for themselves and the world that they are consciously or unconsciously striving to achieve. The allowing is a characterization of the attitude. Surely I believe in and strive for equity and inclusion as long as we maintain the standard pay scales in higher education. Another contribution about, remember, we are competing against other institutions as well. So we're reaching our time here together. And I know there are some voices that perhaps have not contributed at this point in time with some advice or some lasting thoughts. If folks who we've not heard from would like to contribute before we wrap up, please, by all means, this is a great opportunity.
Say that I think it may have taken 12 years, but I think hiring the VP of Mission, Values, and Inclusion is a good step to heading off that centralization that was one of those recommendations. And I hope that will also lead to change in the radical shift at the top leadership. Maybe it's naive to think that that's going to go that way, but we have to be positive as well that this is a good step in the right direction. I think my advice to that leader or the leader.
Arhelia, could you hold the microphone just a little closer?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's my laptop. I just wanted to say the advice to the leadership would be courageous and uncomfortable. That's all.
Another piece of advice that I'd give, I've talked about this in the chat a little bit about appreciative inquiry, and we're actually using that approach or testing it out and planning a staff retreat. And I think it could be something that's really helpful at an institutional level. It really focuses on the positives. It's a strength-based approach to discovering, dreaming, and designing and implementing our future. And it's a very participative process that involves many stakeholders, and it's something new that I don't think we've used before. So I think an approach like that that we haven't tried before will be necessary, something that's bold.
John, I'm being notified your hand is up at this point as well. I'm not sure if you want to contribute. Okay.
I'll ask one more question. I know when we're talking about water use and saving water, we got all diverted onto people taking short showers and turning the water off when you brush your teeth. And those are all good things. But it drew all the attention away from the real water use, which is agriculture and industry. So people are, only drinking half a glass of water when they should do more. And I'm wondering, what are the big rocks? What are the agriculture and the manufacturing in terms of our diversity and inclusion problems at Edgewood? What are the big things? I know microaggressions are bad and everybody should be examining their own heart and making sure that you say the right thing. But are we focusing on, are we getting our focus drawn off onto small things at the expense of than not seeing the big things. So what are the, the equivalent to the Voting Rights Act? What are the big things, the big systemic things that need to be challenged or changed first? And from that, the rest will come. If we don't lose 40% of our water in our leaky pipes, then it's not that big a problem brushing your teeth with the water running, So what are the big things? That's what we should work on.
Well, of course, I would like to thank all of our panelists for your time here this morning, for your candidness, your honesty, and your contributions to our discussion. I am hopeful that our faculty, staff, and administration not only does their own internal work, but perhaps this conversation that'll be shared out might aid people in not only thinking about what their office or department could do, but what they can do in their own day-to-day work to contribute to an anti-racist culture, to dismantle the white supremacy culture that exists at Edgewood. And I just am grateful for having all of you as colleagues and for your service to the college, whether it was on the initial Diversity Council in 2008, or the Inclusion Council, or the Inclusion Steering Committee, or Campus Climate Task Force that produced recommendations, or Inclusion, or the Diversity Planning Task Force, or the President's Diversity Leadership Council. I'm probably missing several committees as well that have existed, and I think that's it speaks to our evolution around our program, but also speaks to some of the issues around coordination and structurally organizing diversity as well. And so I know the new task force, Eradicating Racism, I think it has a new name now, Dismantling Racism. Donna, is that okay? Getting the thumbs up from Donna. I know that group has a huge task ahead of them. And I would just encourage our faculty and staff to rally behind the work that group will be taking on over the next year, because that group is important. It cannot just be another council, committee, task force that has existed and been sunsetted with or without recommendations taken seriously. Because I've personally been part of groups that the recommendations were dismissed without even explanation. And it's demoralizing to the group that put the work in, and the group of colleagues around that particular table have so much value and experience that they're bringing, and they've got a huge task ahead of them. So please show your support to that group. And I, again, am grateful for everyone on this call.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tony, for your leadership.